Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to the main event. I'm Martin, your host. As always, after a short break, we are going into our penultimate season of our series 2012, 13 gegenpressing and all of that. David Edgar is here looking resplendent. How are we, David?
You got me surprised with that one. I wasn't expecting that at all. Yeah, it's lovely to see you too, Martin. It's really great to be back. Doing the show, and when you initially said we were going to stop, I was like, I thought it was a bit early, but this does now, when I went back to watch it, essentially seem like quarter of an hour ago.
Yeah, it's far too close for comfort. Adam's here as well. Adamski, how are we doing?
I'm good, thank you. And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I've loved doing this, but yeah, it does feel like it happened just last week, and I'm keen to finish these episodes. I think it ties it up quite nicely, but I'm also keen to dive into the next project, which I think is probably a badly kept secret, but we'll at least not officially announce it for a while. But yeah, we're happy to be here.
Well, every time we do a season, every single season, I thought, totally forgot that. Completely gone out my head. And David, just looking, as I always do, to try and see if there's any shock, exits at the qualifying stage. The name of Motherwell appears, gubbed by Panathinaikos, but that instant kind of, what the fuck are Motherwell doing? It's, yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yes. I remember it now. It was a bizarre period in Scottish football, which led to this, and unfortunately, this out with Rangers and more occasionally Celtic. This is as far as Scottish teams tend to get in Europe. They go in to a qualifying round and then they exit. The lack of group stage football in Scottish football for years has been, I would have said, a real negative, and I think added to this sense of ennui that gripped the game in the round about this period. But there were other, of course, bigger reasons than that we won't go into, but everyone knows what they are. And yeah, it was. I am confidently going to suggest their first and last foray into anything to do with the Champions League. But they did finish second in the 90s, of course, Martin. Once, but ended up. But back then there was only one place. But they ended up playing Borussia Dortmund, and of course that's where Paul Lambert eventually got his move from.
Adam, the only other one I want to touch on from the qualifiers is Udinese missing out again, and there was just this sense of everyone kind of had a soft spot for clubs like that, and Italy's kind of full of them outside the big powerhouses, and they just couldn't quite get through those qualifiers at times. It was quite frustrating.
Yeah, it was. I think they had a really solid team around this time. I think we've said that before, but Guidolin was obviously a very old hand at the time. He came to England, didn't he? He came to Swansea towards the tail end of his career, so probably not too far away from where we are now. Just a very experienced Italian manager, Di Natale, obviously the absolute star.
What a player he was.
We've spoken about before, but yeah, I think it's a bit of a shock. I think it would have been good to see them through. They were a club that I was fond of. I thought everyone in Italy. I think if you watch Serie A as we do or as we did, and you've got clubs like that aren't really fancied, but they're punching above their weight. They recruit quite well, and they've got one of those Italian talisman up front. I think you can't help but like them. And they were certainly one for me around about this time.
Didn't I give you a new Udinese strip?
Actually, it's upstairs. I'm hoping if I can lose enough weight, I'll eventually fit into it. But yes, that's my two retro Italian ones that I've got at the minute are Di Natale. I think it's long sleeve as well. Udinese top and Nakata Bologna top from the mid-90s is my two. at the minute.
Beautiful. No, I was pretty sure it was a Dean. It is long sleeve, and I was pretty sure it was from this era. Because Adam's right, Martin. They really did kind of capture your heart really a little bit. Maybe in a way that the Potsos haven't done at Watford, it's fair to say.
Okay, let's keep moving then. Group A of this season's Champions League. And Adam, Paris Saint-Germain starting to make their mark under their new money. Some sensible signings, Lavezzi, Thiago Silva, and the shy, retiring Swede, Zlatan Ibrahimović. And they're powered to top spot in their group.
Yeah, I quite like this PSG team. I know we're not allowed to say that probably. Given
We
it's
are
the
now.
whole- we are
We're
now.
allowed-
Now they're back.
Yeah.
In current times, they're back. But yeah, just some of those players that I think that you mentioned were players that I quite liked. There was a bit of a more than a bit of a Serie A vibe to it. I was a bit disappointed when Marco Verratti went there this summer, I have to say, because for me it just felt like one of those moves. It's probably akin to the Saudi moves that have been happening over the last couple of years. In my head, I was thinking, oh, I don't go to France. I don't watch French football. That's annoying. He was someone that I thought could go on and be one of those great Italian playmakers. And to be fair, he probably did. To be honest, certainly as far as certainly one of the best as far as at least concerned over the last decade or so. But yeah, just didn't really want him to go to PSG. Would have liked him to go to one of the bigger Italian clubs and sort of stay in there, as we've spoken about that flood of players leaving Serie A or just not going to Serie A was fully in force at this point. So yeah, I wasn't as maybe down on PSG as some of other people might be. I like the Porto team at this point as well. Dynamo Kiev maybe a little bit not unlucky, but maybe felt like they could have done a little bit better. Probably one of those groups we speak about where there's 2 or 3 clubs that are kind of, there's one obvious one maybe in PSG that are up the top there, but Dynamo Kiev might have fancied themselves if some things had sort of gone the other way, shall we say. Maybe the draw at home to Porto, they might have expected that they would win that one, and then obviously against Dynamo Zagreb, they lost a goal in the last minute, a penalty, probably academic at that point in terms of going through. But yeah, there was a few points there that I thought Kiev might have done a little bit better for themselves. But yeah, I think overall, PSG and Porto going through, there's no major surprises there.
I think a couple of things on it. First of all, on PSG, there was a novelty value there, and some of the players that they signed, like Lavezzi, were kind of, if you followed European football, then they were kind of players that you liked, but they weren't necessarily household names in the UK, I would say. But what they did is they created that template that they only really broke up recently and got the success from, which is we are bringing in a monster star player who we are going to give the keys to. And they'll have, everything will be done around them. And in this case, it was Ibrahimović. So he sort of sets a precedent here. This Porto team, I think, is really interesting. Some of the names in it, there's, Maicon, remember him, Jackson Martinez, João Moutinho, who's a player I always really, really liked, James Rodriguez, coming to the fore at the World Cup, Stephen Defoe, Otamendi, Christian Atsu, of course, sadly no longer with us. But the one that I remembered, and it's the great thing about doing this show, is Eliaquim. Was that the pronunciation? I never got his first name, and I just went with Mangala, the French centre-back, who ended up at Manchester City. Do you remember for a couple of years, this boy was the hottest
mega highly rated.
My goodness. Everyone linked to him and did not go on to do what he was tipped to do. But around about this period, he was the name to drop before he was replaced by Koulibaly at Napoli, who, of course, was sold just as he was on the turn to Chelsea. They kept him and got the best of him. But it's interesting, there's always one name. Before this, do you remember it was always William Carvalho?
Yeah.
was the player that everybody was linked with every summer and just didn't seem to move. And this is an interesting squad of past names and future names, I think, but the two of them run away with the group.
I think it probably shows as well, like, I guess there's maybe an interesting mini-series at some point. We've got a list of things we want to do that will probably take us 3 or 4 years. But in terms of those, when football changed to the big five, if you like, and then also the teams that basically just not existed to develop talent, that's not fair, but their focus on developing talent was a lot higher than some of the others, and they used it to bridge that gap. Porto, Benfica, etc. are maybe the examples of the ones that are at the forefront of that, because
Definitely.
I agree it's a really good team. It's nowhere near as much quality as they had 2004, 2005. But I just wonder, I don't know the answer, but in terms of when that whole conveyor belt of let's bring in Brazilian talent and Argentinian talent and take advantage of the rules, etc. I wonder when that really kicked off for your Portos and Benficas, because it sort of felt like it's just appeared. Maybe around about 2010, 2011, 2012, when the money just started to escalate so much. So yeah, it'd be interesting to look back at that at some point. But like I said, we've got a list as long as our arm of topics and shows we want to look at outside of the Champions League. But yeah, it's a good one.
Well, they were doing it with Jardel, obviously, in the mid-90s. They were able to get by passport rules that we couldn't, sadly, but there we are. Just on PSG, they I'm sure were fully taken over by Qatar in 2011. And Davey, we're kind of used to this by now, with Chelsea, City, and now Paris Saint-Germain, obviously heading towards where football is currently, kind of nation states, quasi-owning clubs. But again, the kind of players you talked about, for the neutral, and the three of us at this point very much were neutrals. We didn't really have really close to having a dog in this kind of race in 2012-13. Just lots of fun, and where Zlatan goes, there's always some fun around.
Yeah, and that's what they were, and I think there was, as you say, we're now sort of used to it, but there was a sense of limitless spending. You know, they're backed by a state, and they have so much money to put into the game. And I don't think, as a sport and as supporters of it, that we had looked as deeply into the background of some of these owners as we do now, and we're much more aware. But it was interesting the way they went about it, where they didn't go and sign the most famous players in the world, a la Real Madrid, for example. They went out and they bought good players, superstar players, don't get me wrong, but not maybe the kind of household names. And then they would go through that spell as well. And then they've ended up where they are now, which is, well, hang on, we need really good players who fit in a team. But at this point, the novelty value was high. And I think it was intriguing to see, right, what are they going to do? Are they going to become... And another thing I'd argue is, if you are the type of fan who listens to this show, or like us, want to do this show, you quite liked PSG, I think, from the 90s. I think a lot of us had a soft spot. Yeah. I don't know particularly why. The type
George
of player...
Weah,
the strip.
Yeah, the strip.
Yeah. The strip. I think a lot of us had a soft spot for PSG. Then, they win everything in sight in France by March generally, and it becomes a bit dull for everyone except PSG fans. And I think we've all enjoyed over the years PSG's myriad troubles in the Champions League, some honestly inexcusable and baffling fallouts from it. And I think now most of us just enjoy this team with all the stuff, the political aspect to it, out in the open and discussed more. And there is, that is a completely different show of, can you separate, regimes from the team. But I think, most of us watching this PSG team can be impressed for what it is under Luis Enrique. But back then, everything was new and it felt new. And you're right, Martin. You hire the one-man art exhibition that is Zlatan Ibrahimović, then you're going to get eyes on you. It was just that they took the wrong lesson from it. They took the lesson from, right, okay, when we've got this... Who did perform for them, who did score plenty of goals for them, but it became a cliche. But it was sort of true that they had these great players, but they never really had a complete side. And now they have a complete side.
Okay, going to Group B, and Adam, here's Schalke still kicking about. They were supposed to have had their run to the semi-final a couple of years ago, and they're kind of back topping a group with Arsenal, Olympiacos, and Montpellier. We'll get to Arsenal in a moment, but yeah, they're still doing things. And this seems to be the highlight of Julian Draxler in his career, because he by far his best return in a career that never really kicked on. PSG, of course, one of his future clubs, but so much was hoped for, believed in around Draxler this time. But another good return from the Germans.
Yeah, again, he's one that sums up this era, I think, that we're moving into of German players. I guess those sort of wingers that can play on each side. They've got pace. They've got power. We see a lot of them now. They're 10 a penny now. I guess coming out of there. But this is where it's all just sort of starting from. And I think we spoke before. I had high hopes for a lot of the German national team around about this time, and he's one that I probably put up there as very high. Maybe not quite in the Ozil or Thomas Muller levels, but certainly not as far off as he turned out to be. So yeah, I think that's one that is a disappointment. I think overall, when you look at the career, maybe again it is going to PSG. Sorry, we do see that with some players. You go there and you're sucked into a machine almost. You've got, as David said, you've got this big star up front, and you're in support. But more than that, you've got these other 2 or 3 players that are all working well together in the attack, and your minutes maybe get a bit limited. You're not quite able to do what you want to do. So yeah, I think at this point, I thought the sky was the limit for him here, but it doesn't really work out for him in that way. It's a very feels like, again, it's probably not true as well, but it feels like Schalke, Arsenal, and Olympiacos play each other every other year in the Champions League. That just it feels like those 3 are just always involved. But yeah, top in the group, it's one that you would expect, I guess, when you've got a German team in there at this stage. They are starting to rise up a little bit. And yeah, I think it's well deserved. Klaas-Jan Huntelaar is there. Fuchs as well, who I think went on to Leicester, didn't he? Just after
he did, yeah.
Just after this, and became a bit of a cult hero there. So yeah, they had a solid team, but they didn't quite. Draxler in particular, I think I was expecting him to be the next big breakout star after that wave that we mentioned, and it just never quite happened for him. I'm sure he's delighted with his career, but I'm disappointed for him.
Well, the sliding doors moment for him comes one summer when Jurgen Klopp wants to take him to Anfield, but he's overruled by the Anfield transfer committee, and they bring in a Chelsea flop from Switzerland called Mo Salah instead, who's done all right.
There you go. He's done okay, hasn't he?
Done all right. I think they're reasonably happy with how it turned out. But Draxler in that side, really interesting. What if? I think.
Dave, you're talking about Enwy earlier on. Arsenal make sensible signings. Lucas Podolski, Olivier Giroud, Santi Cazorla. Everyone's kind of nodding their heads, stroking their chins, saying this is sensible business. And still fourth, and still early knockout stages, nothing doing. This is the dying embers of the long Arsène Wenger era, isn't it?
Yeah, and it feels like that. Santi Cazorla was a player I was really excited when they got, because they did, of course, have their bunch of quality number 10s, but I thought was a more complete player. I would still argue that than some of the other ones. They were very good in specific jobs. I don't think it's any shock, for example, that Samir Nasri flourished at Manchester City. But I thought that Cazorla was a more complete player. You guys know, and I'll just introduce the listeners to this, I bow to no man in my admiration of the greatest Frenchman who ever lived, Olivier Giroud. The Frenchest looking man who ever existed as well. And I will be truculent with you, gentlemen. if criticism was coming his way. But I think this Champions League campaign sort of sums up where they are. Great start. They go off to Montpellier, win. Then they comfortably beat Olympiacos at home. But then Schalke come to town. It's an even game. Steve Bold's on the touchline because Arsène Wenger was serving a touchline ban, which was an increasing factor towards he got very tetchy towards the end of his Arsenal run. But they lose. Tight match. Could have gone either way, but crucial goals come from Schalke. Then they go over to Schalke and they're 2-0 up. And they are playing well. They are the better side. How often do you see this? Huntelaar gets one, last kick of the ball in the first half, and it changes the whole game. And then suddenly Schalke are in the ascendancy. And I think that this is a good metaphor for this Arsenal team, that they were capable of some terrific football. They're brilliant in the first half in the Gelsenkirchen. They really are. But the second half, they are put under pressure. How do you react to that? Can you come through that tough period? And the answer is no, and it ends up a 2-2 draw. Now, they're still in a good position to get through. They've got 7 points. They then wrap it up with a fairly straightforward victory at home to Montpellier. And then in the last game in Greece, they basically send, the Maro and Shamak's playing. But it's the thing about this Arsenal team that they just seemed to tread water, didn't they? They would just do enough. They would, as you say, finish fourth. They would get through the group, then win the group, go out at an early. Everything was respectable. Nothing was a disaster. There would be cup wins along the way, but you just never got the impression that this was a side that were capable of going on and becoming exceptional. At times, in moments in game, in periods in games, they could play some superb football. But even then, there was this sense of, but let's see what's happening in 20 minutes with them. Because they had so many talented players, and when they were all on it, they were a joy to watch. When they weren't on it, or when an opponent interrupted that game plan, you didn't feel that this was a side who could rally and show that resilience needed to go on and go deep in a competition as stacked as this Champions League year.
Yeah. I mean, this is when talk starts. I really get, I think, into traction about, listen, it's time. It's time. He has to go. Will Arsenal ever sack him? No, we're just going to leave him to decide. And he's still got 5 other seasons, maybe up to 2017-18, whenever. And it's FA Cup, I think, that propels those final days. I think he wins three in the last 4 seasons or something like that. But in terms of winning the big ones, it's pretty clear that the ship may have sailed. But anyway, that's Arsenal and Schalke going through. A team, Adam, I don't think we've mentioned before, and they've topped Group C, a group that includes Anderlecht, Zenit St. Petersburg, and Milan, and it's Manuel Pellegrini's Málaga. Hipster target, wasn't it? I mean, it was just drawn like moths to a flame with this team.
Yeah, we were just talking about them off air, weren't we? And they certainly were. I think this was... Is this just... the timescales are really confusing me, but is this just after? I know Malaga had the issues, didn't they, with getting relegated, etc., and the financial issues. I think it must be around about this time, so maybe it's coming up. But at this point, a really fun team. I think a team very much of its age. It's a collection of pretty solid players, not necessarily in a defined style or anything. I guess that's Manuel Pellegrini all over, really, isn't it? It's a collection of players that you can get to play well, but there's a lot of fun names in there. Diego Lugano, Martin De Michelis, the best agent in the world.
David loves De Michelis.
That bloody hair.
Tulalan, Julio Baptista.
I did like Tulalan.
Yeah, Rocky Santa Cruz.
I really did.
Is there at this point. Rocky Santa Cruz at this point is what I'm going to class as a sprightly 31-year-old. Because
what wonderful word.
As I think I've said more times than I can remember on this show, he's still playing just now at the grand old age of almost 44. Rocky Santa Cruz. But I think he's in.
Van Nistelrooy was
potentially-
there in the season before, wasn't he?
Mm.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering what the financial issues that they had.
I think it was
'cause I'm sure-
the late noughties. I think they had financial issues, and another club that had funding ownership from the Middle East, I'm sure.
I think they still do.
And that's what
yeah.
kind of propelled that revival by the 2010 onwards, and why all these players all of a sudden are coming in. But
I think it's
because
after
this
this,
is what
isn't it? I'm pretty sure it's after this. I think from memory, I think with the whole financial fair play coming in, maybe similar to the Monaco period as well, where they had the Russian owner and they had Mbappe and all those guys. I think Chouameni and a few others were there at the point, and they'd hoovered up quite a lot of talent that was around about 16, 17, and then sold it, and it all sort of went to pot. So yeah, I think there was probably financial issues that are just coming for Malaga, but take nothing away from them at all. It's a great performance in this group. I feel like I don't want to say we know Milan aren't what they were, because again I've probably said that every week for a long time. But,
That's a problem with this show, because when we started off, they're the benchmark.
Yeah.
So right from the start of this, basically from about year 3, we've been going, I don't know what they were, because they weren't. So it's a shame for Milan, but it's not our fault.
Pellegrini, then, boys, he is. Cazorla's obviously gone to Arsenal at the end of that 11-12 season that propels him into the Champions League. But it's his stock that's rising, Davey, and it won't be long before he's in Manchester, of course.
I always liked him. An understated manager, but a very good one. And still, now at Betis, still reaching European finals and whatnot. But he was somebody who I thought was, like I say, kind of almost the antithesis to modern coaches, Martin, that he was very understated. He was maybe not someone who had a philosophy that he wore on his sleeve, but his sides did play good football and they were good to watch and they competed at very high levels in top 5 leagues. He wins a league at City, which is almost forgotten about, I think. He's almost now become a footnote. The Mancini one gets mentioned because it was the first, and Aguero, and his gets, I think, sort of forgotten about. But it's he's won a league title in England. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to win a Premiership, and he managed to do so. I think the disappointing spell at West Ham, clearly,
Yeah,
but. In La Liga, he knows how to operate in that division. He knows how to get the best. He is also, I think, a very good eye for older talent. Adam's just touched on that is not past its sell-by date. But they had lost the beating heart of this team. I mentioned earlier I was excited when Arsenal signed Cazorla, and it was because of this. And he was, as I say, the complete beating heart of this side. But they were turning heads at this point. Could this be every so often aside? There seems to be room in Spain for one at any given point. In this show, we've had Valencia, we've had Deportivo La Coruña to threaten the 3 giants. Girona recently, at the time of recording, had a wonderful season. Someone seems to come through and threaten somewhat to maybe upset the apple cart, but that would be a bit like when Ajax or Porto have a great side. The glass ceiling is there immediately, because as soon as you do well enough to get noticed, your players are going to be picked off. And the fact that their star man, their inspirational man, was currently plying his trade in the group above is testament to that.
Adam, quickly on Pellegrini before we move on to a fascinating group to round this off. A South American coach, where does he fit in the kind of wider coaching pantheon around this time? Because the super coaches, I get the feeling, are starting to really kind of come to the fore. We're going to talk about one in a moment, but where's Pellegrini on this scale at this moment?
Yeah, I think on the super coaches point, I think you're right. I think we're obviously seeing it's difficult from looking at it now and thinking. I still don't think anybody really thought the Guardiola impact would be what it is now in terms of what we're talking about at that time, because it wasn't the first time we'd seen a Barcelona team do something like that, and you're thinking, how do you adapt it somewhere else? Is it really transferable? All that sort of stuff. And then what's coming, as you rightly said, is a huge amount of focus on not off the ball in the sense of off the ball 10 years before with Mourinho and Benitez, in terms of, I guess, more defensive minded, but off the ball in terms of how do we win it back quickly and so high up the pitch. Is obviously coming with Jurgen Klopp, and then Guardiola adapts to that as well, and a little bit of gegenpressing gets thrown into him. I would say he is. Pellegrini is probably possession heavy for sure. It's not necessarily built around quick transitions or anything like that. It's not route one at all. It's as is standard at this time, 4-2-3-1, I guess, with that sort of double pivot, the two holding midfielders. And then you'd have maybe the uniqueness about that is, as well, as it wouldn't necessarily be a number 10 and two wingers and a forward. It'd be a bit more flexible there. You'd have room for a couple of floaty players like an Isco, and maybe a Saviola type. You might have one, sometimes two centre forwards, Julio Baptista, Van Nistelrooy was mentioned as well. So not pressing by any means, or not quick players, but I would say it's more of a kind of possession-based style, patient where it can be, but also when they need to, getting that ball forwards, getting the fullbacks wide and high once those sort of midfielders that we mentioned, or those attacking midfielders had sort of pulled the defenders out of shape. So it was an interesting one, not particularly unique or inventive or anything for the time, but just a manager that knew how to build a 12, 15 players and use them well in a system that benefited him and got the most out of him. So yeah, I would say it was possession heavy, getting the ball to the players in the right areas, and sort of knowing their strengths and knowing their weaknesses. Yeah.
We'll finish with Group D, as we always do, on the first part of a new season. And my word, two European giants, I suppose, name anyway, Real Madrid and Ajax, and two sides, Adam, who had to learn some lessons in their kind of debut, or Manchester City's debut season, but Borussia Dortmund back after some trouble, and they were champions of Germany going into this one. What could they learn? Well, we'll find out what they learned together. I mean, City must have been furious. It's a difficult group last year, and they get Ajax, Real Madrid, and Borussia Dortmund. One deals with it a lot better than the other, I think it's fair to say. And we'll come to City in a moment, but Borussia Dortmund top the group. They beat Real Madrid at home. They draw away. Not a huge amount of work during the summer, I don't think. I think a young Marco Reus comes in. You've got Kagawa going to United. But just looking at the players who played so many games that season, it's just almost a crystallization of what was going on around German football at that time. Lewandowski, of course, Reus, Gundogan, Götze, Hummels, Blaskowski, one of the Bender brothers, amazing, and there are a few others. What happened this year that just they couldn't get to grips with last year? Was it just the success of winning the title? And there's a belief there. There's another year in the legs. Klopp's ideas really taking root. Let's go.
Yeah, I think we can trail this just now, if that's the right word. But I would like to. I think the final was a really good example of how this style works. So we can delve into the intricacies of it then. But yeah, I think you've sort of nailed it. I think it sums up where German football was at this time. I think they tapped into that, or where it was starting to come to from the World Cup, as we mentioned. So I guess the interesting subplot here as well, as we've spoken about Barcelona, Real Madrid, and maybe the Italian clubs, and maybe the German clubs as well to an extent, the French clubs. There hasn't really been a big rivalry that's spilled over into the Champions League, or not necessarily a rivalry, but two big teams in a nation that are going at it year on year, other than the Barcelona Real Madrid ones that we've just came out of. Really, but what I think was interesting about this is a really good team, really young and youthful, but they're not up against a rubbish Bayern Munich team as well. They're up against a Bayern Munich team that for me is, it's not hard, but it's my favourite Bayern Munich team. I think of the time that we've been covering it. They're going to go on and become a little bit better, obviously, but I just like the balance that they've got here. So it's interesting because you're not just up against an old tiring team as they might have been 10 years previously. You're up against a team that is bringing in new players, bringing in Manuel Neuer, bringing in these younger German players, bringing them through from the academies and supplementing it with proper talent as well, while still cherry picking everyone from the Bundesliga as well as they always do. So I like that. It's very much a David and Goliath thing, and I don't doubt Klopp tapped into that at all. So yeah, they were very of their time. I think the year before for me is it's a slightly better team. I was a huge fan of Kagawa, I can't lie. And
title team.
Yeah, and also Lucas Barrios as well was a player that I really liked. When he left them, I was a bit surprised because he went to China, I think. Again, right about this time, it wasn't unknown for players to be going to China in the way that they go to Saudi just now. But just at the point, I thought, why have you done that? That's a bit strange. He wasn't particularly old. I'm going to guess he was mid to late 20s. It must have been a life-changing amount of money. But it just felt a bit strange because it was all set up. He was perfect for the team. Just that core that they had. You mentioned Royce, Götze, Lewandowski obviously comes in, Matt Hummels, Bender, the fullbacks just were so intricate to it as well, or crucial to it as well. Kagawa and Barrios as that sort of number 10 and pressing striker, if you like, were just unreal. I think they missed those two. They do a damn good job of replacing them, absolutely, but I just think they missed those two. So for me, in terms of what I liked, I think the title winning season before is a better version, but you could probably argue there's more sort of quality in this one in a kind of reverse way. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting team, and again, would have been good if they'd been able to keep them together or go for a lot longer than they did. But obviously things happen, as we know, and it's a nice little story for Dortmund as well, because 10 years before, Michael Zorc, sporting director, they're absolutely skint, going through all sorts of financial issues, and he drags them back up and makes these really, really intelligent signings from Eastern Europe and a couple of far-flung ones like Barrios coming from Chile, I think it was at the point he came through. So just finding these players for very little money and getting Klopp to turn them into a team was a really interesting thing at the point, and they just almost felt like they came from nowhere, even though they very much didn't with these things. It's just we only noticed them for a couple of years because of what was happening at the time, even though I think Klopp had been there for 4 or 5 seasons, I think, at this point, and it sort of felt like it just appeared within the couple of years before this. But yeah, very interesting. Gegenpressing is something that I got into heavily at this point as well. So we can obviously look at that in further episodes. But like I said, it was built around youth and energy and pressing, and no longer were teams losing the ball and then sort of retreating and waiting for, like a basketball game, waiting for a team to sort of come and get their attack. It was, okay, you've lost the ball, well, let's win it back as quickly as we can, and then that team are really vulnerable when we've won it back, and vice versa. So the dynamics of it and the science of that is quite interesting, and we can dig into that in a couple of weeks.
Look forward to it. Davey, the first game of the group, 5 minutes to go, Manchester City are 2-1 up in the Bernabeu, and they lose 3-2. And they finish bottom of the group, and the season ends in the rain at Wembley, with everybody knowing that Roberto Mancini is out, I think, before kick-off, and they lose to Wigan in the FA Cup final. You mentioned the Aguero moment. We see it so often, sadly, kind of close to home. When you hit such an emotional high and you don't have a squad full of players who are used to such highs, the crash is probably inevitable, and it certainly was.
Massive hangover, and there's really no other way to describe it, and this season sort of feels like that, culminating in that performance at Wembley where they lose, of course, to Wigan. But it is amazing, isn't it, how you can trace almost, and it's too easy. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but there they are. They're in a tight game. They take the lead. Real Madrid equalise, and then with 5 minutes to go, you get the second goal, and you lose the match. And of course, who gets the winner? It would be him. Was always him, and that's him with a capital H, by the way, as he would insist upon it. But then after that, you mentioned the draw. There's no easy game. There's no recovery game where you go, okay, lads, right, we're at home to X. Next game, they face a very good Borussia Dortmund team that Adam has just spoken about. And they steal a draw at the end with the Balotelli penalty. Then they go off to Amsterdam, and these two games are what kill them. They're a goal up and doing well, concede right on half time. Luke de Jong, who's still cutting a bit, and then a young Eriksen seals that win for them, and then the return leg where the rot now is set in. They have 1 point out of a possible 9. You need to be perfect. That brings its own pressure, and they're 2 down inside 15 minutes at home to Ajax. Now they salvage a draw out of it, but you're sitting with 2 points after 4 games. You're not going through. You've got Real Madrid and a trip to Dortmund ahead. And they do all right in these last 2 games in terms of performance. They got 1-1 draw at home to Real Madrid. I think they could have saved everybody's time that night. Both teams, I think, could have just shook on this before they went out, and they would both been quite happy with it. Then they go down narrowly in Dortmund. And there was no room for the comfort. There was no safety net in this group, Martin. There was no side that you were taking 6 points off, so you could write that off straight away. And this was a City team that, as you say, were struggling very badly to get back up to the level that they'd been at the year before. That were struggling to get back the hunger that they'd had the year before, that sense of drive, that sense of mission. And at a club like Manchester City, as they had, I think, had become, we're at the very early stage of it, but they'd still had become a Champions League campaign like this and a league campaign like they're having, the manager isn't staying. It doesn't matter that he's won you the league the first time. And it wouldn't have mattered. You mentioned there the cup final. Everybody knew on the Friday night that he was leaving regardless. It was going to be a valedictory, wave the cup out, Louis van Gaal style, actually, at Manchester United, not long afterwards. And it was going to be that, go and wave this, and they, of course, they fail to complete that. Football is a good way of kicking you in the nuts. So, yeah, it was almost like they'd sold their soul to get that moment the year before, and the devil had come round to collect the season afterwards. But we've mentioned this before as well, though, that when you're not experienced Champions League campaigners as a club, and City do not have it in their DNA the way that Liverpool, for example, have, then it can be very difficult, and it can run away from you. And I think, from our club's experience, and I'm sure fans, clubs all in Europe, getting into Champions League is such a high, especially when you're not used to it. And City were not used to it at this point. It was still a novelty. It's such a high. See, when it starts to go wrong, it's a long old campaign when you're not playing well. And when things are going against you, it's a long old campaign, and drudgery can set in. And of course, it seeps into your domestic campaign, and that's what we saw from City.
And Borussia Dortmund and Real Madrid will meet again in spectacular fashion further down the line. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll wrap up there. Cheers, Adam.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, David.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Until next time, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.